This is editing Tiera just coming in to say that you will notice throughout this video there is an audio change. Like the audio you hear is going to be completely different than the audio that is played when the video actually starts. There's also a lot of lighting changes, a lot of errors in the video that I did not catch while recording. I also did not realize how long I would be recording. Please ignore those. I will make sure to have them fixed for next video. And enjoy the video. Let me know what you guys think. A couple housekeeping things. First off, thank you for 400 subscribers. Happy to have you guys here. This is a commenter request. There are so many comments on the first season of My Little Pony that wanted me to do season 2, so here I am doing season 2. If you have not seen me do my coverage of season 1, click on, I think it's here, where you can see season 1. What I kind of do or thinking to do going forward with my channel, we'll do one commenter request, and then we'll do one random one off my list, because I have a very long list of topic ideas I want to do for videos, and then I'll do another commenter request, and we'll just go every other, unless it's like a big project or something like that, but I'll keep you guys posted. I think that's it. If you're new to my channel, welcome. If you're not new, then welcome back. For those who are new, like I said, see my season 1 deep dive. Please go check that out, because we're gonna jump right into going about season 2 of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. So in case you haven't seen the first episode and you just want to jump into season 2, or you need a quick refresher, we're gonna be using my pony criteria for the episodes this season. I'm gonna continue to use it for all of the Friendship is Magic episodes and movie adaptations. So P is practicality. Is the lesson actually useful in the real world? O is the story fresh, or is it something that we've seen before? N, narrative execution. Does the plot flow naturally and make logical sense? And then Y, yield. Does the ending leave a lasting, meaningful impact? Throughout this entire thing, I'm going to be using psychological terms, analysis, just to kind of break down, but we'll be ranking all episodes of My Little Pony Friendship is Magic from episode 24 to episode 1. For 2-parter episodes, I combine them into one on my list, but I put them all together in my notes. Season 1 is a lot different than season 2. Season 2 is more ambitious, more chaotic, and more complicated. Let's just jump right into it. Number 24, Mystery on the Friendship Express. So from the very beginning of this episode, I was left wondering why they didn't use just magic to teleport the massive dessert of the high stakes of this. And, you know, since it's really big that they want to protect the desserts and all the other desserts that are on the train. And especially if the competition is that high profile, I'm with Pinkie Pie on questioning why security was just so non-existent on the train or heading into the competition. While Pinkie Pie is very validated in her overthinking once she finds a massive bite, multiple massive bites taken out of the cake, the episode quickly turns into her dragging out wild accusations and completely ignoring Twilight's clues. The constant references to like James Bond, Murder on the Orient Express are really fun to catch, but they don't actually do much for the lesson. Especially because throughout the episode, Pinkie Pie is just making things up to blame her peers, blame people on the train, instead of seeing the truth. It's a shame because the episode Baby Cakes, which is later on this list, was earlier this season and was such a strong showing for Pinkie Pie's character. Yet here she feels much more immature, though I have to admit Rarity's line about her false eyelashes made me laugh because of how iconic it is. You've probably heard the TikTok sound where she's like, "Fine, I'm guilty, I wear false eyelashes." Oh, and I took a bite of the cake. That's this season. that moment in the episode, that made me laugh out loud, and I completely forgot this episode's plot. The ending where they combine all the desserts to win is a really sweet resolution, but it really highlights that the core issue here isn't jumping to conclusions. It's a massive lack of self-control fueled by Pinkie Pie's tempting descriptions of the desserts. Even though the written lesson is about getting all the facts before blaming others is great on paper, Pinkie Pie immediately eats the final dessert in front of everyone after learning how to be a detective and share it and that pissed me off. That just pissed me off so bad because we had this long conversation about how good the desserts are and how you're describing everyone's delicious dessert and you ate the whole thing before anyone could try it. Bitch. That pissed me off so bad. It made the whole journey feel so stupid when character growth is instantly discarded for the cheap gag. Again, I get it, this is a kid's show, but like, it left the entire episode feeling like a missed opportunity for actual and more development from Pinkie Pie. Because again, it pissed me off so bad. Number 23, Secret of My Excess. This episode is trying to frame Spike's massive hoarding as a manifestation of greed instead of ignoring the reality that he is a baby dragon lacking basic impulse control. I honestly struggle to understand what the lesson here is because while we do get like a funny but kind of overwhelming Godzilla parody, there isn't any genuine behavioral consequences. So much like the development that we see with the Cutie Mark Crusaders and that we'll talk about in later episodes when they kind of come up in this ranking, their entire conflict feels like a waste of an episode because we are focusing on a child who doesn't know any better. And again, this would be an opportunity for like Twilight Sparkle or some of the older figures in Spike's life to have a conversation with him. And again, we see them have those key moments in later episodes. It's not here though. There is a saving grace in this episode, which is Rarity's reaction of Spike terrorizing the town, things like that. And because she drops her helpless victim act that we saw her do in season 1, where she had to act like a helpless victim and people had the helpless victim ideology on her. She doesn't let panic dictate her actions, and it's really refreshing to see her not being scared and actively proving how being emotionally resilient and genuinely strong can be helpful in high distress situations. But rather than reacting with hostility, she relies on emotional regulation and using kind words to de-escalate Spike, the giant monster. And I love that she recognizes this hoarding instinct as being biological. Like, that's not who Spike is as a person, it's just something that's happening to him as he's developing. While the Godzilla monster reference doesn't work for me, mostly because I don't really care for monster movies like that, it doesn't even make sense in the context of the episode, because even though we have Rarity's mature communication and it redeems a lot of the episode, it's just a weird and bizarre situation that we are blaming all this happening onto a child instead of just having an open and honest conversation and learning more about a dragon that you don't know much about them and their culture, which, again, we're going to talk about a lot more later. I get so pissed off in these beginning ones because the later episodes are so good. Number 22, the mysterious Mare duel. Rainbow Dash completely abandons her empathy that she had shown towards others in these earlier episodes, and it makes it so frustrating to watch. Instead of maintaining any sense of humility in her heroism, she becomes addicted to the need for external validation and prioritizing her fans' attention over assisting a person in danger. Her arrogance reaches such a level that when there are people in danger, she shuts down. And oh, it pisses me off so much because it shows that in an actual emergency situation, when people are in distress, she doesn't really know what to do. While her friends are noticing these toxic traits and drop obvious hints about being the mysterious Mare duel, they honestly milk it way too much when this could have been a perfect opportunity for them to have a conversation to Rainbow Dash about how frustrating it is and how frustrating it's looking for her to act like that and not just doing good out of doing good. I consider this a weaker episode and lower on the list because unlike Apple Bloom making reckless choices or Spike not knowing his biological factors, those are children who just don't know any better or who are still learning and making mistakes. Rainbow Dash in this context is a full-grown adult with a job and a contributor of society where everybody knows her. So to me, it feels like her petty jealousy is very unwarranted. Even though her behavior is completely out of line, I have to admit, sometimes a severe lesson has to be learned the hard way for some people for them to actually get the lesson. But she does drop her stubbornness and embrace modesty at the end of the episode. We do come full circle, but it is still a weaker episode overall. Number 21, talking again about Apple Bloom, we have an episode about Apple Bloom's desperate need for that external validation that Rainbow Dash had, which is why I made that comparison in the Cutie Pox. The episode is great, but it is still frustrating to watch because it is genuinely nice to see Apple Bloom's friends, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, acting as a positive support system by helping her to look on the brighter side when she's really down and trying to cheer her up. But her inability to sit with that insecurity pushes her to take matters into her own hands. So by artificially forcing her cutie mark, she instantly shifts from anxious to arrogant and actively excludes the Cutie Mark Crusaders who had been with her that entire time just so she can show off. Despite her frustrating behavior, I find it amusing that the illness does seem inspired by that real life historical phenomenon where everyone was like dancing and couldn't stop dancing. Some people died. I think that's very interesting, but it's also really, really great to see Zecora step up as an essential part of the community after her misintroduction or how people misjudged her in the first season. I really like to see that change. And it does encourage, she's the one who encourages and pushes Apple Bloom and tells her what she has to do to finally tell the uncomfortable truth about what she did. I really appreciate the dialogue between Zecora and Apple Bloom and having a figure outside of your own immediate family that you trust and that you lean on who can help you stand 10 toes down when you need to and admit things to yourself that you might not have. It's good to have that support system. And I think that the actual lesson is really great. My problem is that the show keeps giving us the exact same story with the Cutie Mark Crusaders. Even though Apple Bloom apologizes for lying, I don't believe Apple Bloom is learning this message. And like we had talked about with the earlier episodes, I kind of understand because Apple Bloom is a child. These are still children really wanting to have something, but her and the Cutie Mark Crusaders just refuse to learn that you can't take shortcuts with Cutie Marks. They still lack the maturity to just wait because they are children. As I continue to watch these and binge these, I want to see, and I know we do get more out of the Cutie Mark Crusaders outside of just, I want my Cutie Mark. So I'm really excited to see those episodes, but right now it's starting to get really repetitive as we go further into the show. Number 20, the Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000. We're back to another banger of an episode that dives into a scarcity problem more than anything else. The pony's desperate obsession with Cider overrides any desire to share basic courtesy to the Apple family. And that is why, even though this is a banger episode with a banger song, it is lower on my list. I think that Rainbow Dash acts like a jackass here. Rainbow Dash acts like a jackass for a lot of episodes in this season. And she and the rest of the town show zero appreciation for the labor that the Apple family puts in making a living wage. And Pinkie Pie just eggs Rainbow Dash on to make it worse. Flim and Flam might be scammers, and they do have a fire song, an introduction that highlights the classism divide between high-tech unicorns and the Apple family's traditional Earth Pony manual labor. It gave me whiplash to see how quickly the community turned on Applejack and the Apple family, proving that their loyalty, in this episode at least, was entirely dependent on convenience. And as much as Applejack and the family have the respect of the ponies folk from season 1 and what we'll see in a later episode this season, it's not guaranteed and not promised for them, which is really frustrating. This episode feels less like a lesson on friendship and more like an episode or critique on capitalism. Though the takeaway that you should take your time to do the right thing because the work speaks for itself is, again, a really good conclusion to have. I do appreciate the main six finally switching up to help when they see their friends in trouble, but it feels a bit hollow because they're only stepped up because they were losing and there was a risk of them moving out and losing their livelihood and being embarrassed rather than helping with a problem that, as they said, have been going on for years. Rainbow Dash threatening the brothers doesn't absolve her of her rude behavior, and I firmly believe that the Apples deserve a massive apology from her because, honestly, Rainbow Dash was worse than the Flim Flam brothers in this episode. It's very telling that the townspeople only reject the machine and the Flim and Flam's product because the product was bad. And while I have a lot of questions about why an entire business would be decided by one competition, it's clear that Flim and Flam are not the real villains. Number 19, Read It and Weep. Rainbow Dash is again being an asshole this season, and she is very overdramatic in this episode and in these early episodes of the show, and it makes it really hard to watch sometimes. Even when she has such incredibly supportive friends, it is because of her incredibly supportive friends that a lot of these episodes are redeeming for me. And I know, and I'm so critical of these early seasons because when we get to these later seasons, especially after season 3 and after the first Equestria Girls movie, is when we see some of these really hard-hitting episodes and hard-hitting lessons and this really strong character development from these people that I just had to hold on. But in this episode, Rainbow Dash is stuck in the hospital because she had a crash and her friends helped her get to the hospital. So when she's stuck in the hospital, her friends are very quick to point out that Rainbow Dash has a very big bias to reading. And I think this is very interesting, especially in the context of and I keep bringing it up because obviously I read a lot of books in the context of the United States is in a literacy crisis. So I think it's interesting that we're going through, that I'm kind of talking about this episode because there is the bias that some people have, like Rainbow Dash, about wanting to not be viewed as an egghead. Rainbow Dash pushes aside her friends' actual feelings and opinions when they try to talk to her about enjoying the book and enjoying reading and finding something to do that's going to help her. And when she actually starts the book, she gets to experience the magic of stepping into another world and relating to characters as a form of escape. And I think I wrote here in my script, I said Twilight and Rainbow Dash would love a Kindle. Because I tell so many people as a big reader that it isn't that you don't like reading, you just haven't found the right book yet, because there's so many different books and so many different genres. And what's so frustrating to me is when Rainbow Dash actually starts to read and she enjoys reading, she pushes her friends away out of pure immature fear of being labeled an egghead after she spent so much time insulting them. I like seeing the dual storylines here, especially the way the fictional adventure mirrors her own internal experience. And for a lot of people and a lot of readers, that's what they're looking for. They're looking to get some of that dual experience of another person to help validate who they are. I know I'm really into dark romance. I have a few dark romance books right here. A lot of people who have a lot of sexual assault trauma and a lot of trauma with rape, they like to read those dark romance books because they are able to kind of take themselves out of it and kind of view it from another lens. And it is healing for some people. It's not for everybody, I'll tell you that right now. But it is healing for a lot of people to read some of those really triggering things. So Rainbow Dash having to relate to another character in her book who has a damaged wing but has to continue having this expectation and this adventure that she's missing out on but having to work was great for Rainbow Dash to have. I still found this episode really frustrating because Rainbow Dash decides to, instead of having a conversation with Twilight, she sneaks back into the hospital rather than just being honest. It's frustrating to me because I get, because of her stubbornness, why she doesn't want to just talk to Twilight, who lives in a library, stated that she has the entire collection, and apologize. And instead, it just seems so immature for her to commit a crime and break into the hospital. especially with how much her friends have made it very clear that they would be very supportive of her. Rainbow Dash sneaking into the hospital is just her avoiding a simple conversation because she feels bad about her earlier insults with her friends. To play devil's advocate, I understand, because she constantly told her friends how they're big eggheads and she'll never be like them and da-da-da. So she wants to do it out of pride because she knows that she had insulted them badly. And even though her final egghead confession isn't really fulfilling for me because the narrative frames her illegal break-in so lightly, the ultimate lesson feels less like don't knock something till you try it and more like a messy episode on trying not to be judgmental. I do appreciate Rainbow Dash apologizing. It's just the execution of how we got there was just not great and not strong enough. It was just not, don't break into the hospital just because you want to read a damn book. Go to the library. Support your local libraries. I got nothing else to say there. Support your local libraries. Number 18, a friend indeed. I wrote a note here. I said, Pinkie Pie would love working for the Smiling Friends. Even though she would love working for the Smiling Friends, I would love to see someone animate that and tag me, please. I think Pinkie Pie's behavior in this episode made me realize how exhausting her energy can be for someone who isn't already in her inner circle. My main issue is that the opening song doesn't do much compared to previous musical numbers because it just reiterates that Pinkie Pie loves to make people smile, which based off of her character is pretty implied already, and the meat of the actual plot doesn't start until 6 minutes in. These are 24-minute episodes. That's like a fourth of the episode. And again, I do know how iconic that song is, and some very particular fan-made videos were used for it. I don't really care for the song, so maybe I'm a little biased. I'll put my bias out there. But it doesn't, I like to make people smile. That's pretty implied, Pinkie. Like, the kind of person you are. I don't really need a 6-minute song for that. I will say though, Pinkie Pie is a very good representation of neurodivergent people and neurodivergent traits when it comes to missing social cues through this episode. But I completely understand where Cranky Doodle Donkey is coming from. He is clearly establishing a boundary and communicating his needs, yet Pinkie Pie is so adamant about making friends that she completely disregards his personal space and even shouts at him being bald in front of everyone. Bald! 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 My eye! That's all I can think about. Between embarrassing him and eventually damaging his property, his invaluable property, her persistence feels less like kindness and more like she's chasing him until he finally gives in to her. Even though he says thank you for the wig and the spa treatment, her apology later doesn't feel genuine to me because she dismissed his request for privacy over and over and over and over and over again. She eventually accomplishes what she wants to do, but it happens entirely at the expense of pushing him way past his limit. I would argue the ultimate lesson here is that every friend is different and has unique needs. So making someone smile should not be the goal if it means disregarding their comfort. If someone doesn't like you, you don't need to continuously push their boundaries because at least with Cranky Doodle Donkey, he yelled at her, he cussed her out, he said some not nice things to her. There are some people, if you do not listen to their boundaries, that they may act violently. That's the truth. And number 17, baby cakes. Pony genetics is wild, and it'll get brought up later, but the fact that 2 Earth ponies can have a unicorn and a Pegasus baby is crazy, but does make a lot of sense when you think genetically. I love how Mr. and Mrs. Cake are portrayed as having such a solid support system, which they definitely need as Earth ponies trying to manage the flight and magic of newborn babies. However, it says a lot about Pinkie Pie's reputation that she isn't their first choice for a babysitter, despite the fact that she's been living under their roof, likely rent-free this entire time. My main issue with Pinkie Pie's behavior in this episode is that she doesn't seem to comprehend that these are babies. These are newborn babies. When we have a time jump for the episode, it's been like a few months. Or a month. I don't know. I'll put what it says up here. And she doesn't have any basic caretaking instincts that you expect that she would pick up by now. Again, living under their roof, in their attic. When Twilight Sparkle insults Pinkie Pie's lack of responsibility, she is hurt, and her reaction to being hurt is valid. Yet instead of, asking about what to do, she's obviously insulted and, convinces herself that she can do it all by herself. And it does highlight a massive gap in her maturity compared to how the rest of the main 6 have been growing throughout the season. The episode mainly shifts into a very funny horror movie parody with the babies as they start to wreak havoc with magic and with flight. And that crash out moment when their powers kick in is very funny and very real, especially for, I'm not a mother, but I know a lot of mothers, especially a lot of people who might not have other supports to help lean on. It is, especially with newborn babies, it is a lot. a lot of energy. So having that just emotional crash out where you just need to cry. But here, it doesn't feel right with Pinkie Pie because she was given every opportunity to try to be mature, to try to learn, to try to figure it out. Because again, she lived under their roof, in their attic, rent-free, and she never volunteered to, what? Girl, you didn't even listen about what works, what doesn't work. It's a bit frustrating that this is the first time she's even offered to help her hosts, and it feels like it's the self-inflicted consequence of just her own lack of awareness of being in the house. While I enjoy the humor, the dynamics suggest that Pinkie Pie just has a long way to go in understanding the weight of accountability. I also really like that at the end, you know, while she's initially hesitant, she realizes that, you know, the impact she's making on these children is important and that she has much more to learn. And that there are some moments where you have to put fun aside and be serious and have to take care of another person. So we have both sides. It's just, again, frustrating because the actual episode itself is great, but then conceptually, under their roof for free, and you've never heard the babies cry. You've never heard what works. You've never heard them screaming, crying, stressing. Girl. Number 16, Family Appreciation Day. Apple Bloom's attempts in this episode to hide Granny Smith from her classmates does highlight the painful social anxiety that comes with just being a kid trying to fit in. And it is forgivable because she's so easily influenced by peer pressure at her age. I just find it frustrating to see her bullied into thinking that she should be ashamed of her own grandmother and of her own culture. Another note here, someone needs to step in and beat Diamond, Tiara, and Silver Spoon's asses. But they do weaponize social status to make their peers feel small. On the positive side, I was very captivated by Granny Smith's story of resilience and the grit it took to feed her family and help make an impact of the, I think it was the foundation of Ponyville. And especially the way the Zap Apple history very paralleled the modern day harvest that was going on. I would argue that while Apple Bloom finally learning to value her heritage is great, and again, it is reflected in so many later episodes, we are again having the same conversation about her insecurity in almost every single episode. The way this story comes through feels a bit repetitive because it's heavily focuses on a child being bullied without ever actually confronting the toxic behavior of her peers. Like, Apple Bloom got her development. Like, I'm glad she found her confidence through listening to Granny Smith's story, but hearing a cool history lesson doesn't change the fact that her classmates were being bullies. Someone needs to hold those two and her parents accountable for the kids' behavior instead of just letting a heartwarming tale solve a social problem that is going on. Number 15, Burger King Footlet. Number 15, Heartwarming Eve. Heartwarming Eve lays out the foundation of Equestria through heavy pony lore, and it does give us a really good look at, you know, the historical fiction between three main tribes of ponies. While the central tradition dictates that these groups needed to stop being selfish, I find it very telling that the founders in the story are setting aside their prejudices strictly out of survival, rather than actual genuine empathy. The realization that they're all the same is important, but it comes at what feels like a surface level story when you talk about or look at the deeply ingrained classist nature that these three different tribes uphold. Watching the Earth ponies, Pegasi, and unicorns navigate this forced proximity highlights the very fascinating favoritism and tribalism that makes this like harmonious alliance feel a bit too easy. The setup mirrors societal divisions and biases that we already know exist in the real world, but it stops short of digging into the real meat of the conflict. I would argue that this would have been a really great opportunity to explore the behavioral differences between equity versus equality when dealing with power imbalances. Instead, the story pulls its punches right when the social commentary starts getting interesting, choosing to avoid challenging the audience's understanding of prejudice. It just settles for being a standard Christmas parody episode and takes a massive world-building concept and ties it up with an overly simplistic festive bow. Because again, a lot of these divides that we see, a lot of these classist divides between the unicorns, Pegasi, and Earth ponies are very clear. Like, most of the unicorns live in these high done updo societies like Manhattan or Canterlot or whatever. And then, you know, Pegasi are separated, they live in the clouds. And then you have Earth ponies that have to do a lot of manual labor, have to do a lot of hands-on things. Like, there is a class divide between these three ponies. And we haven't even gotten to the fact that later in the show, we get introduced to other creatures like griffins, like the buffalo, like, we're just focusing on those three, and there's clearly a class divide between the three. And then the alicorns are just above everybody. Nepotism. Anyways, that's the season 3 issue. Number 14, It's About Time. Twilight Sparkle's need to overplan and stress about a single thing in her life reaches a breaking point when a mythical version of herself appears from the future and delivers like a very vague, terrifying warning. And I really appreciate here that Twilight's friends in the main six don't dismiss her. They indulge in her worry and fear, and which shows a massive shift of how they support her compared to the earlier episode, Lesson 0, which is later on this list. However, while the show wants to frame her panic as a lesson in overthinking, I think Twilight's reaction is entirely valid. Because listen, if my future self showed up right here, right now, in this room, looking like a battle survivor, I would be freaking out too, trying to prevent the future. The sheer amount of things that she does to try to prevent a disaster that she doesn't understand is an interesting look at her struggle with control and anxiety, but it makes the ultimate lesson, not to worry and let the future handle itself, feel like it doesn't completely land for me, because her response is a completely natural reaction to a supernatural event. Despite that, the execution's still pretty solid, as she eventually realizes that some of the things that she was stressing over could be handled just by letting time take its course. It's a good overall message about trying to micromanage every single outcome before it even happens. I just love that she finally has peace at the end by deciding that that stress is past Twilight's problem and choosing just to live in the moment. Number 13, The Last Roundup. At this point in my watch, I really needed a good episode. This episode explores the crushing weight of high expectations and the fear of not meeting them, and it is very relatable. I am so glad that the world building is expanding more consistently, and it gives us a great setup where Applejack is driven by the desperate need to win prize money for the town and avoid disappointing them. While I find it very admirable that her friends are so persistent in trying to understand what was wrong, I have to argue that it's a bit rough because they end up pressuring her so much that they don't give her any space to be honest. Like, they just push her over. Editor Tiera here. I forgot to mention the fact that Applejack had written to her family saying that she will never return ever. No reason, no nothing. Abandoned her entire family out of nowhere because of that feeling of regret. They had to go out and find her. Like, she dropped off the face of the earth. They turn over cities looking for Applejack. And it is all because the immense pressure Applejack just has to deal with, and feeling like it's better for her to never show up at all than it is to disappoint people who expect so much out of her. So I don't want to discredit her friends here, but I understand where both sides are coming from, because we already saw it in season 1, and we saw how much that Apple family depends on her and her decisions in this season with the earlier episode I mentioned, Super Speedy Cider Squeezy 6000. Even though their group approach is very overwhelming, I still appreciate their persistence, because that's exactly what good friends do. They stay by your side even when you're at your lowest. Seeing Applejack spiral because she's afraid of being a failure makes this a really strong, character-driven episode. Number 12, Dragon Quest. Spike's quest for self-discovery here does hit on a lot of very heavy themes of cultural belonging that I really find compelling. Twilight steps in as a very maternal role here, and I think she does the right thing by encouraging Spike to seek answers that Twilight doesn't have, even acknowledging that her friends have no right to stop Spike's search to get answers. While Rarity and Rainbow Dash follow him with Twilight out of protection, they struggle with their own assumptions about awful dragons and almost forget how important this search is for Spike. It's very painful to watch Spike feel so lonely and insecure that he resorts to doing things he knows are wrong just to fit in with older dragons who tease and mock him. The turning point of this episode is where he decides that killing a child, or in this case a phoenix egg, isn't worth any amount of cultural validation, and it's such a big standout moment for his personal growth. He reaches the realization that who he is not the same as what he is, and it leads to a very beautifully written lesson to the princess, and I think it is very sweet. My biggest issue with this episode, though, is the very end, where the final line is where he tells the phoenix, "I have so much to teach you about being a pony." And I feel like we were so close to reaching a good, strong statement on having a dual identity and being part of two different cultures at once. And it just feels like a little bit of a regression on his character. Number 11, May the Best Pet Win. Rainbow Dash treating pet adoption like a high stakes evaluation really highlights her obsession on status versus genuine emotional connection. However, I'm very happy with how clearly the story foreshadows her ultimate choice, especially since Rainbow Dash spends half the episode insulting the very tortoise she ends up adopting. While her requirements is this ruthless physical contest, it makes sense for her wildly competitive ego. I have to point out that in this episode, her actively sending unequipped animals through Ghastly Gorge could be described as animal abuse. But I hate PETA as much as the next person, so we're gonna ignore that. Despite the obvious physical limitations, it is so wonderfully ironic to see that Tank, the tortoise, is the only candidate who consistently tries and refuses to give up and pushing through massive disadvantages to prove his worth. He actually manages to achieve her ridiculous criteria with a few clever caveats, which honestly makes his eventual rescue of her so sweet. Thankfully, Rainbow Dash... Who's Rainbow Dash? Rainbow Crash! Thankfully, Rainbow Dash drops her superficial checklist and realizes that loyalty and dedication are the factors that make a good companion for her. The letter she writes really captures the shift in her mindset, and seeing the smile on Tank's face is so sweet, and it feels so earned and very satisfying for both of them. Number 10, The Return of Harmony, Parts 1 and 2. In the season 2 premiere, Discord wakes up to cause chaos around Equestria, and it's not just a standard villain plot. He actively weaponizes the group's vulnerabilities by taking away the elements that they represent. This story very quickly establishes that teamwork and working together can help solve any problem, and I find it interesting that Discord makes a lot of very solid points about their friendship to break their dynamic down. He forces Applejack to confront the reality that a lie is sometimes easier than the truth. He points out to Pinkie Pie that laughing at someone isn't the same as laughing with them, and exposes how Rarity's greediness can easily outdo her generosity. I love that Fluttershy is so honest and genuine about her friends that Discord didn't even get to manipulate her. He just had to force it. And while Rainbow Dash gets hit with the very mature dilemma that being loyal to your hometown versus loyal to your friends are two very different things, the core lesson here is that you need to fight for friendships. My main issue is that Twilight argues that they need to fight for them till the end, which makes the overall takeaway a little weak, because in the real world, not every friendship needs to be fought for when it is naturally ending, and sometimes it is healthier to establish a boundary and let things go. While I understand the narrative in the context of the episode, pushing through manipulation shouldn't always be the default response. Discord's uncomfortable truth successfully proves that their dynamic requires continuous active work rather than just relying on magical elements and on harmony. Number 9, Hearts and Hooves Day. I find it hilarious how the Cutie Mark Crusaders embody how children act when they're obsessing over whether their teacher has a boyfriend. Working with kids is so funny. Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Do you have a boyfriend? Are you gay? You look gay. Their reckless behavior is a great example on how kids just don't understand romantic chemistry. And it leads them to use a literal love potion that triggers some very funny cartoon chaos. I love that Shirley is very upfront about the situation with Big Mac, and her maturity even seems to humor him, though I really think that they should have sat down the girls for a serious conversation about boundaries much earlier, especially since they repeatedly kept trying to put them together. Instead, the story leans on the cringe of two people excessively in love, which is a consequence of the girls trying to force a connection. What I find interesting is that the girls realize the massive mistake they made right away. And they don't just hide or try to let someone else figure out the problem. They took immediate responsibility and rushed to fix it through any means possible. The lesson that you can't force people to fall in love because choice is a right is a very good moral, and especially since the girls actually apologize once they see the damage. It's a very big and nice step up from their earlier habits, especially Apple Blooms in the Cutie Pox, and it shows that they are slowly learning that good intentions don't justify toxic manipulation. And this episode proves that while their hearts were in the right place, forcing a bond on others is a disaster and requires real accountability to fix. Number 8, Hurricane Fluttershy. Fluttershy being terrified to participate in a community-wide project because of her fear of failure and humiliation, just like in season 1, is a very great depiction of performance anxiety. But I find it so frustrating that Rainbow Dash, who had a lot of experience with performative anxiety in the first season, spent most of the episode obsessing over breaking a physical record instead of actually focusing on why the tornado was a necessity for the town and for Cloudsdale. Even when Rainbow tried to calm down, she was clearly prioritizing her own ego over Fluttershy's mental health, which makes me question if Fluttershy's trauma is rooted in that past bullying or if her brain is just stuck on a loop of just toxic self-criticism. Her animal friends were a much more effective support system because they stood beside her and provided evidence of her previous bravery while she trained and cried through her panic. It's fascinating that Fluttershy eventually had to find her own determination and had to find her own source of pride rather than leaning on Twilight or Rainbow Dash, who both felt very detached from her struggle. My main issue is that her friends only seem to value her achievement after they translated it into Rainbow's narrow perspective of success, and it highlighted a very disappointing lack of natural empathy and how she only really stepped in during a literal crisis to help the town, doesn't actually resolve the deep-seated insecurity issues Fluttershy has been battling since the first season, because by omitting the record in favor of focusing on the need, the group should have made a priority in the beginning when it came to supporting a friend in distress. However, this is still such a great episode overall because we see someone who doesn't have to rely on external forces and pushes through them and finding their own value and their own confidence without having to heavily rely on other people. Number 7, A Canterlot Wedding, Parts 1 and 2. These episodes are bangers, and they finally start to prove that the show is capable of handling actual villains and genuinely high stakes beyond just bickering over cake or tongue gossip. I find it interesting here that Twilight's total meltdown is rooted in a very valid issue. Her brothers got engaged without telling her in person does create a massive rift in their bond. And while Rarity and the other ponies are projecting this high stakes stress about planning a royal wedding, the group constantly dismisses Twilight's concerns as they prioritize the excitement over the event over her intuition. Even though the imposter insults Pinkie Pie's reception and replaces the bridesmaids with strangers and throw away Apple Bloom's food, Twilight's possessiveness turns toxic when she chooses to publicly shame her brother instead of having a level-headed conversation, which again, she had attempted to have a level-headed conversation with him earlier. They were just interrupted. So she was trying to do the right thing, she just didn't have the opportunity to, and she jumped to conclusions. I loved seeing Shining Armor read her for filth because from his perspective, she was sabotaging his happiness and leading to that brutal moment where even Celestia turns her back on her saying, "You have a lot to think about." And then the song This Day aria, hanger. It highlights the contrast between the manipulation of a predator and the real Cadence, who, in my head, how long has she been down there? Because she's probably starving. Also, this episode has the one where Twilight shakes her ass in front of the fake Cadence's face, Queen Chrysalis's face, and I can't ever watch that without cringing. While the show tries to frame this as a lesson in trusting your gut, I would argue that it's a bit messy because being right about a threat doesn't necessarily justify her erratic behavior. However, the badass fighting and the way love eventually defeats the changelings does set a great new standard for the series, despite Princess Luna being gone for like most of the episode, because girl, where the fuck were you? The finale is really great at raising the stakes, raising the bar, and proving that even though Twilight's delivery was flawed, she was trying to do the right thing. She was trying to step up. She was trying to protect people, and she eventually was right. And her motivation is always anchored in this deep, protective love for her family and for her friends. Number 6, Sweet and Elite. Here we go with another Rarity episode that actually proves that Rarity understands how generosity works, because she gives a lot of who she is and what she wants to so many other people. Rarity here faces a very real struggle with social climbing, wanting to be listened to, wanting to be heard, wanting to reach for the very things that she's been wanting her entire life and her entire career, and just getting caught up in the validation of the upper city and forgetting why she is there. I consider this a very, very good episode because it allows her to chase those dreams that she wanted. Eventually, she learns that she doesn't have to sacrifice who she wants to be. It really illustrates that Rarity doesn't have to choose between climbing the social ladder and keeping her original support system. Even when the pressure to assimilate to this new group becomes overwhelmingly stressful, she remembers how important it is for her to rely on her true friends to help keep her grounded. The narrative establishes that no matter where you are, no matter how far you travel or how high you manage to elevate your status, you have to remember the people who got you there and got you to where you are and how they shaped you. And I think that is just so important and so beautiful, especially since she came to that conclusion herself and she made that admission to the Canterlot people, even if it was at risk for her losing all of the opportunities that she was given to her. Number 5, Ponyville Confidential. The Cutie Pox Crusaders constantly need to compare themselves to others does push them to actually try joining the school paper. And even though Scootaloo immediately clocks that Diamond Tiara is a terrible person to work with, I find it great here that they actually genuinely try to attempt journalism. So like writing about baby birds or interviewing Granny Smith. The story does eventually force them into creating exaggerating gossip to get the attention that they crave. It's a good parallel to real world journalism where people put aside their values to climb the social ladder, and it's very heart-wrenching to see these children lose their excitement for something that they love just to chase their cutie marks. Twilight is the only one who early on clocks the danger of exaggerating this gossip, and while her friend's it's just fun attitude shows a disappointing lack of boundaries, it reaches a point where Rarity finally gets hit by the column directly. And I'd argue that Rarity's reaction is a bit toxic because she only really cared about the paper once she became the target. She does recover by using a very relatable older sister lesson about snooping through a bag to actually validate Sweetie Belle's guilt. Being blackmailed by their boss is very crazy touch that leads them to being ostracized by the whole town. The girls put themselves on blast in an open letter that feels very sincere and authentic and proves that they've learned that making fun of others is horrible and is never going to be their destiny. Seeing them take full accountability to earn back forgiveness is a very great resolution that highlights how much they've grown since their more reckless mistakes in previous episodes. Number 4, Lesson 0. Twilight Sparkle's desperate reliance on wanting to make sure that she delivers her assignment on time is a very relatable portrayal of high functioning anxiety. It gave me a lot of whiplash seeing her completely crash out over a missed deadline, especially since she feels like an entirely different character from the very strong-willed Pony who defended her friendships in the season 2 premiere. But her intense fear of being late triggers a massive spiral of her overthinking, and her friends try to be supportive by insisting that her tardiness isn't going to be a big deal. However, brushing off her panic ends up completely invalidating her stress, and instead of actually taking her feelings seriously, she is driven by sheer academic panic to create a fake friendship problem to regain control, and she resorts to manipulation to create it out of thin air. Even though it predictably causes massive problems for everyone around her, I really appreciated Spike in this episode stepping up to do the right thing to help her break this loop, and it does lead Celestia to step in and eventually tell her star pupil to chill the hell out. I love that the show is tackling these very real pressures that people are experiencing, and it does deliver a very great execution on how academic stress and unchecked perfectionism can just completely turn a person around. Number 3, Luna Eclipsed. The concept of Nightmare Night functioning as a Questious Halloween by making fun of Nightmare Moon is such a fun backdrop that really met my high expectations for this episode. Luna immediately makes her presence known, and I find it very compelling that she demands to change the tradition and be loved, masking her deep insecurity behind a booming, intimidating voice. Having trouble adjusting to society after 1,000 years in isolation makes perfect sense, and it is honestly so refreshing to see a former villain portrayed as genuinely socially awkward and completely out of touch with modern norms. Despite the constant setbacks, Luna reached out to Twilight and her friends for help to fit in and showed, there goes my lighting, whatever. I mean, dark and spooky, but ooh, we're gonna keep going. Despite the constant setbacks, Luna reaching out to Twilight and her friends for help really shows a beautiful vulnerability, proving that even powerful figures need a support system to navigate social integration. I would argue that this delivers a much stronger lesson than what we've seen earlier this season, largely because Twilight uses logic and understanding to help Luna instead of letting her intense anxiety dictate her motives. By actively leaning on other people's resources and opinions rather than stressing herself out, Twilight models how to be grounded for someone experiencing a severe culture shock, setting up Luna's long-term character development later in the show. Luna's true personality shatters the intimidating image that both the audience and the citizens of Ponyville have projected on her, and watching her try to start over really delivers a fantastic message that even our darkest mistakes can be forgiven. Number 2, putting your hoof down. Fluttershy decides to toughen up in this episode, and after being a total pushover, it is a very satisfying thing to see her character revisit, especially since we've only seen small glimpses of her being assertive a few times before this. I find it really interesting how Pinkie Pie and Rainbow Dash try to support her by making the lesson fun, but there's a Pinkie Pie and Rarity. But there is this uncomfortable undertone when her best friends and the random salesperson call her a literal doormat to her face to motivate her. Once she fully commits to Iron Will's philosophy, she completely loses it, and watching her insult her friends for being too soft is very painful to sit through, but I would argue that she gets caught in a cycle of overcorrecting where she mistakes being a monster for having healthy boundaries and fails to realize that standing up for yourself shouldn't come at the expense of being a decent person. I love that her friends don't just abandon her after she hurts their feelings. Instead, they continue to reach out and offer her different actions to try to find a balance that works for her. It is very refreshing to see Pinkie Pie and Rarity's louder tactics, the ones that they'd been using previously, fail, and it isn't until Fluttershy speaks in her own calm, quiet manner that she manages to be assertive. She uses a clever loophole at the end to shut down the demand for payment. It is so genius of her, and it proves that she can be firm without sacrificing her kindness and sacrificing who she is. This episode is great. It is a great change of pace because it teaches us that standing up for yourself is a skill that is learned. It doesn't mean you have to change who you are. Number 1, just like in season 1, the number 1 episode is, I believe, another Rarity episode, is Sisterhooves Social. Sweetie Belle, genuinely trying to be a good sister who looks up to Rarity, is a dynamic that was mentioned before, but I love seeing it fully elaborated here into a great concept for an episode. My main issue with this episode, Rarity's early behavior and how she uses her sister rather than treating her like a person, and completely forgetting that she is a child who just needs attention and just easily gets frustrated with her. However, the overall execution is fantastic because I can easily see both sides. Rarity is trying her best to be patient and actually set a very strong, necessary boundary when her workplace is ruined, even if she handles the fallout poorly. It creates this very realistic rift between Rarity and Sweetie Belle, and is when Rarity is very grateful for her sister, but stubbornly refuses to admit it, she pushes Sweetie Belle to seek out a positive sibling role model in Applejack. I find it to be such a very sweet, authentic display, especially when Applejack steps in to give Rarity the tough advice that she desperately needed to hear. Seeing Applejack and Rarity secretly switch places in the mud so Sweetie Belle gets to run the race with her sister, a very messy activity that Rarity doesn't want to do, it's just a massive leap in emotional maturity. They lose the race, but they have a good time connecting together, which is far more important than winning. The letter they write up together wraps up just such a genuinely great episode, and in my opinion, the best of this season, because it demonstrates that real sisterhood requires active compromise and teamwork, because doing that hard work is way better than not having that bond at all. So to conclude this season, and this video that my lighting and camera work has been messing up the entire time, season 2 feels like a massive pivot from the foundations of season 1. It trades some of these simple lessons for much more ambitious and sometimes very messy explorations of boundaries and psychological elements. Even though season 1 was more consistent, I would argue that it reaches a level of maturity that the first season didn't get to, and is elaborating a lot on that emotional maturity. We see characters like Twilight and Fluttershy grappling with such intense feelings of anxiety and performance pressure that it feels so real. Yet the show struggles with some incredibly frustrating character regressions. My main issue with this season is just how often the narrative fell into repetitive loops with the Cutie Mark Crusaders, or let an adult like Rainbow Dash act more immature than the children that we spent watching season 1, or that we, are blaming a baby dragon on some things that he can't control about himself. While the consistency of character growth is hit or miss this season, I do love the expanded world building and the introduction of the actual high stakes villains that we saw in the season 2 finale, and I know it gets bigger and better from here, baby. Season 2 is much more complex, and I would argue it's not as smooth as season 1. I feel like, I want to hear your opinion. Do you guys think season 1 or season 2 is stronger? Because reading my script, I'm looking at my script, there's one paragraph left in the script. And now that I'm thinking about it, season 1 might be stronger just because season 2 was a little more ambitious. And I think it's because season 1 laid a foundation of these characters and who these characters are. And in season 2, I'm seeing repetitive plot lines. I'm seeing character regression instead of character growth. I think that's my overall take. I think season 1 is better so far. But it is willing to tackle messy real world social dynamics. And that's what I'm appreciating about season 2. It's becoming more ambitious and it's trying to expand. And I appreciate that, but I think season 1, the foundation was just so strong with a lot of these characters. It does make a more interesting watch and it's more fun to watch, but I do think that overall season 1 was just a whole lot better. Overall, I did enjoy watching season 2. Banger, banger, banger songs, and I cannot wait to watch season 3 for you guys. That's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you agree with my ranking? Do you disagree with my ranking? Do you think season 2 is better? I love hearing all opinions, whether I agree or disagree with them. If you really like this video, please like this video. As usual, let me know all of your thoughts in the comments below. I read all of the comments, and I will see you guys all in the next take. Bye-bye!